Imagine living in a world where 4 out of every 10 children die before reaching adulthood. A world where most people never travel more than 20 kilometers from the place where they were born, where your ancestors control your decisions. These people were obsessed with their ancestors. Where military defeat can mean slavery, and where one man can march across snow-covered mountains with elephants and almost destroy the greatest superpower on Earth. We're traveling back more than 2,000 years to explore ancient Rome. This isn't simply a story about emperors or gladiators or conquest. It's also a story about ordinary farmers, family traditions, political ambition, military genius, and a civilization whose influence still shapes the world we live in today. Why did Rome become so powerful? How did it survive disasters that would have destroyed most nations? And perhaps the biggest question of all, did Rome ever truly fall? This is Listen Global English. We help you improve your English while exploring fascinating stories from the past and important stories from the world today. I've been doing this for 16 years, teaching this way in Colombia. Now, when people think about ancient Rome, they often imagine enormous marble buildings, mighty emperors, and huge armies marching across Europe. The reality was very different. For most of Roman history, life was extremely hard. In fact, one of the greatest differences between the ancient world and the modern world, it wasn't technology, it was survival itself. Historians estimate that in many ancient societies, including Rome and Greece and Egypt, somewhere between 30 and 40% of children, they died before reaching puberty. So think about that for a moment. Imagine having 5 children and losing 2 of them before they become adults. For ancient people, death was not unusual. It was a regular part of everyday life. When we talk about mortality, we are talking about the number of deaths in a population. As an example, infant mortality was extremely high in the ancient world. Puberty is the stage in life when a child begins to become an adult physically. And life expectancy. When we talk about life expectancy, we are referring to the average number of years a person is expected to live. Even psychologically, this must have changed how people viewed life and family and the future. So despite enormous technological differences, many historians believe that human nature itself has changed very little. Fear, love, jealousy, ambition, greed, and hope. These emotions connected Romans to us. When historians discover graffiti written on walls in places like Pompeii, they often discover something surprising. People back then complained about politicians. They wrote messages of love. They insulted their neighbors. They complained about bad service. Familiar, yeah? One famous example from Pompeii simply reads, "I wonder, wall, that you have not collapsed under the weight of so much nonsense." It seems that human beings have always enjoyed complaining. That's a useful expression, to complain about something. For example, many Romans complained about corruption in politics. Now, history books usually focus on emperors and generals and famous battles. But what about everybody else? The truth is that around 90% of people in the Roman world were farmers. Most Romans lived in small villages. They rarely traveled. They worked the land, they married locally, they raised families, and they died close to where they were born. They never met an emperor, they never visited Rome. Many never even saw the sea. And this is important because history often focuses on extraordinary individuals while forgetting ordinary people. We have an idiom here, the unsung heroes. This expression refers to people who make important contributions but receive little recognition. The farmers of Rome were very much the unsung heroes of Roman civilization. Why do we still talk about Rome 2,000 years later? It's partly because Rome influenced almost every aspect of Western civilization. Many English words come from Latin. Our legal system owes a lot to Roman law. Political concepts such as the Senate, Republic, and veto, they all originated in ancient Rome. Even architecture continues to reflect Roman ideas. If you look at government buildings in cities such as Washington, London, Paris, many of the buildings resemble Roman temples. A useful piece of vocabulary here is legacy. A legacy is something handed down from previous generations. As an example, the Roman legacy remains visible throughout the modern world. Now, Roman history is usually divided into three major periods. We have the monarchy. Traditionally, Rome was founded in 753 BC by the figure Romulus, the legendary figure Romulus. And during this, the earliest period, Rome was not much more than a collection of huts on several hills in central Italy. It was ruled by kings. It was a monarchy, a political system ruled by a king or a queen, a monarchy. And around 509 BC, the Romans overthrew their kings and they created a republic. The word republic comes from Latin, and it means a public affair. In theory, citizens participated in government through elected representatives. Many modern democracies draw inspiration from the Roman Republic. But Roman society was far from democratic by modern standards. Women could not vote. Slaves had no rights. And political power remained concentrated among wealthy, aristocratic families. Still, the Republic proved remarkably successful. Over approximately 5 centuries, Rome expanded from a small Italian city into a Mediterranean superpower. Eventually, though, political conflict and civil wars destroyed the Republic. Following the rise of Augustus, the first emperor, Rome entered its imperial phase. Emperors now ruled the Roman world. But Romans hated the idea of kings. So emperors, they avoided calling themselves kings, even though most of them possessed almost unlimited power. Politics then and now often depends on presentation. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of Roman culture was its absolute obsession with ancestors. Modern societies, we celebrate individuality. Romans celebrated family history. Elite Roman families displayed wax masks of deceased ancestors in their homes. Children memorize the achievements of previous generations. Your family history defined who you were. And this produced enormous social pressure. We have a phrase here that we use a lot: to live up to expectations. It's relevant here. It means to be as successful or as good as people expect. Roman aristocrats, they spent their lives trying to live up to the achievements of their ancestors. So far, we've seen that the Romans were deeply traditional people. They were farmers, soldiers, and citizens who believed strongly in family and duty and the example set by their ancestors. They were obsessed with this. But values like these, well, values alone do not build an empire. So how did a small settlement of huts on the hills of central Italy become the dominant power of the Mediterranean? The answer lies in one of Rome's greatest strengths: its ability to absorb people and ideas, and even former enemies, into the Roman system. We're going to look at how Rome transformed itself from an obscure and unknown Italian town into the most powerful state in the ancient world. We'll meet some of the extraordinary people who stood in Rome's way, including one man who came closer than anyone else ever would to destroying Rome itself. His name was Hannibal. But before we get to Hannibal, we need to understand how Rome became powerful in the first place. When people think about successful empires, they imagine military superiority, bigger armies, better weapons, more money. Yet, historians today, they increasingly argue that Rome's greatest strength was something much less dramatic. It was integration. Now, integration means bringing different groups together and making them part of a larger system. And this is where Rome behaved very differently from many ancient powers. In the ancient world, conquest was often brutal, extremely brutal. A city might be defeated, looted, destroyed, and its population enslaved. The survivors remained enemies forever. The Romans certainly could be ruthless. They were ruthless at times. There are many examples of Roman brutality throughout history. However, especially during their early expansion across Italy, the Romans often chose another path. They went another way. Instead of simply destroying defeated communities, they frequently incorporated them into the Roman state. Some of these conquered peoples, they became full Roman citizens. Others became allies. Others received partial citizenship. And although these arrangements were not always equal or fair, they created something extremely powerful. They created loyalty, or at least cooperation. The Romans gradually turned former enemies into partners, and this decision changed history. When we talk about integration, we mean the process of bringing people or groups together into a larger whole. To give you an example, you could say Roman integration of conquered peoples helped create a powerful empire. A citizen is just a person who legally belongs to a country and has rights and responsibilities. An alliance is an agreement between people groups or countries to work together. That's an alliance. And conquest, when we talk about conquest, this is the act of taking control of territory by force. Another key reason for Rome's success was manpower. Manpower just refers to the number of people available to perform a task, in this case, military service. Rome possessed an extraordinary ability to replace losses. Many ancient states could survive one military disaster. Some could survive two. Rome was able to survive repeated catastrophes. They lost battles, they just raised another army. Lose again, raise another army, and then another, and another. Their enemies simply couldn't keep up. This resilience, this ability to keep doing this, raising more armies, this astonished Rome's enemies. One historian described fighting Rome as like fighting a hydra. A hydra, or hydra, was a mythical monster from Greek mythology. Every time one head was cut off, two new heads grew in its place. They wrote about this. That was exactly how Rome appeared to its enemies. Defeat one army, another appears. Destroy that one, a third emerges. An idiom here that's relevant is to bounce back. It means to recover quickly after a setback or a defeat. And Rome always seemed able to bounce back after military disasters. One of the best examples of Roman resilience comes from a Greek king named Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus was one of the finest generals of his age, of his time. He arrived in Italy with an experienced army, advanced tactics. He even had war elephants. The Romans fought him. He defeated them. The Romans raised another army. He defeated them again. And Pyrrhus thought the Romans would now negotiate peace. Instead, Rome just raised yet another army. At this point, Pyrrhus supposedly said, "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." From this story, we get the expression a Pyrrhic victory. A victory achieved at such a great cost that it's almost equivalent to defeat. As an example, in modern day, you will hear the company won the court case, but legal expenses bankrupted it. It was a Pyrrhic victory. Eventually, Rome conquered the entire Italian peninsula. Then, Roman attention shifted eastward. They started to look eastward. And they encountered one of history's most remarkable civilizations, ancient Greece. The Greeks had already produced extraordinary achievements in philosophy, mathematics, literature, science, theatre, and politics. Figures such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They had transformed intellectual history. The Greeks generally considered themselves culturally superior to the Romans. To many Greeks, Romans appeared uncultured, provincial, unsophisticated. Yet Rome possessed a remarkable quality. The Romans had very little pride when it came to borrowing good ideas. They were practical. If something worked, they adopted it. They integrated the idea into Roman society. Many things we think of as uniquely Roman were actually borrowed from other cultures. If you look at the Roman toga, we think it originally came from the Etruscans. Some religious rituals were borrowed, taken from other cultures. Certain political institutions evolved from outside influences. And Greek philosophy profoundly shaped Roman thought. Roman literature often imitated Greek models. The Romans didn't see borrowing as weakness. They saw it as intelligence. To take something on, that's a phrasal verb that's very relevant here. It means to adopt or accept an idea or a responsibility. The Romans took on many Greek customs and transformed them into something distinctly Roman, for example. This ability to absorb and adapt became one of Rome's defining characteristics. Maybe there's a lesson here for modern societies. Cultures that remain completely closed often struggle to innovate. Rome remained remarkably open to useful ideas, regardless of where they originated. Now, before Rome became powerful, another civilization actually dominated much of Italy, the Etruscans. But even today, historians know relatively little about them. Their language remains only partially understood. Yet their influence on Rome was enormous. Many historians believe that Rome's final kings were actually Etruscan rulers. The Romans probably inherited many important cultural practices from the Etruscans. Aspects of religion, ceremonial dress, architecture, and political symbols. Sometimes history remembers the successor and forgets the teacher. The Etruscans are one such example of this. Now, as Rome expanded beyond Italy, it encountered another rising power, the city of Carthage. Carthage was located in what is today Tunisia, in North Africa. Like Rome, it had become wealthy and very powerful. But the two civilizations were fundamentally different. Rome was a society of citizen farmers. Carthage was a maritime trading empire. Maritime just means connected with the sea. A merchant is a person who buys and sells goods, and a mercenary is a soldier who fights for money rather than loyalty. The Carthaginians relied heavily upon mercenary armies. Rome relied heavily upon citizen soldiers. So Rome dominated on land. Carthage dominated at sea. Conflict became almost unavoidable. You see, there's a famous phrase in international relations, geopolitics. Geography is destiny. This means that a country's location often shapes its history. Rome occupied Italy. Carthage occupied North Africa. Now, between North Africa and Italy, you have the island of Sicily, and both wanted control of it, both Rome and Carthage. So war became almost inevitable. And these conflicts became known as the Punic Wars. There would be 3 of them. But the Second Punic War would become one of the most dramatic conflicts in all human history, because it introduced Rome to one of history's greatest military geniuses. His name was Hannibal Barca. Many military historians still regard Hannibal as one of the finest commanders who ever lived. You see, Hannibal understood something essential about Rome. Rome did not win because it won every battle. Rome won because it could always raise another army. So Hannibal developed a bold strategy. Instead of waiting for Rome to attack, he would invade Italy itself. He hoped that if he repeatedly defeated Roman armies on Italian soil, Rome's allies would abandon the Roman cause and seek independence. It was a brilliant idea, and to achieve it, Hannibal decided to do something that many believed impossible. He would march an army across the Alps with elephants. Even today, that achievement remains astonishing. Imagine moving tens of thousands of soldiers, horses, and elephants across snow-covered mountain passes more than 2,000 years ago. Obviously, many men died. Many animals perished. But Hannibal succeeded. And when he came down from the mountains into northern Italy, the Romans were absolutely shocked, completely shocked. An enemy army stood on Italian soil, and it had arrived from a direction nobody had expected. So the Romans sent an army. Hannibal destroyed this army. The Romans sent another. He destroyed that one too. For the first time in generations, Romans began asking what to them was a terrifying question. Could Rome actually lose? An enemy army led by one of history's greatest military commanders had crossed the Alps, invaded Italy, and repeatedly defeated Roman forces. This was Hannibal. But things were about to get even worse. By the year 216 BC, the Romans had had enough. Hannibal by now had already destroyed several Roman armies. Rome now decided to crush him, once and for all. The Romans assembled an enormous army, maybe as many as 80,000 men, one of the largest armies they had ever fielded. They believed that sheer numbers would guarantee victory. Instead, they marched into one of the greatest military disasters in history. The battle took place near the small town of Cannae in southern Italy. Hannibal knew he was heavily outnumbered, but he also understood something crucial. Roman commanders, they expected battles to follow familiar patterns, and Hannibal intended to exploit these expectations. At Cannae, Hannibal employed a strategy known as double envelopment. Envelopment means surrounding an enemy force. Double envelopment means surrounding the enemy from both sides at the same time, simultaneously. So imagine being squeezed from the front, both sides, and eventually from behind. That's exactly what happened to the Romans. Hannibal deliberately placed some of his weaker troops in the center of his line. This just didn't happen. You normally put your strongest troops in the center. He put his weaker troops. And these soldiers were told to slowly retreat as the enemy advanced. The Romans, of course, they believed they were winning. In reality, they were walking into a trap. Hannibal's strongest forces were on the flanks, on the outside, and they defeated the Roman cavalry, and then they attacked the Roman army from the sides and the rear. The Romans suddenly found themselves surrounded, trapped. They couldn't move. they were unable to escape, and what followed was slaughter. Historians estimate that around 60,000 Romans may have died in a single afternoon. To put that in context, that's more than the US lost, more men than the US lost in 20 years of the Vietnam War. In one afternoon, around 60,000 Romans were slaughtered. Even by modern standards, the scale of the killing is almost unimaginable. And military academies throughout the world, they actually study Cannae today. When I said to walk into a trap, that's an idiom. It means to enter a dangerous situation without realizing it. The Roman commanders, they walked straight into Hannibal's trap, for example. Now, maybe the most fascinating question is, why didn't Rome just surrender? Most ancient states would have negotiated peace. Many would simply have collapsed. But Rome did neither. Instead, the Romans made a remarkable decision. They simply refused to fight Hannibal directly. There was a Roman statesman at the time named Quintus Fabius Maximus, and he advocated a different strategy. He said avoid major battles, shadow Hannibal's movements, wear him down slowly, attack his supply lines, and deny him opportunities for decisive victory. At the time, many Romans, they hated this strategy. To them, it appeared cowardly. They wanted to face Hannibal head on. But it worked. When we talk about supply lines, we just mean the routes used to transport food and weapons and equipment to an army in this case. And to wear someone down, that's a phrasal verb, very relevant. It means to gradually weaken someone through continuous pressure. You could say the Romans hoped to wear Hannibal down over time. So Hannibal is marching across Italy looking for a direct confrontation to finish off the Romans. But Rome opened new fronts elsewhere. And at this time, a brilliant young commander emerged. His name was Scipio Africanus. Scipio attacked Carthaginian possessions in Spain. Spain was very, very important to Carthage at the time. Scipio achieved important victories. And then he made a bold decision. He invaded North Africa itself. And suddenly, Carthage was threatened directly, similar to the way Hannibal had originally threatened Rome. At this time, Hannibal had spent more than a decade, 10 years, well, I think it was 12 years actually, campaigning successfully in Italy. But he was forced to return home. And these two military giants would finally meet, Hannibal and Scipio, at the Battle of Zama. Scipio won, and Carthage was defeated. Rome had survived its greatest crisis. And after surviving Hannibal, Rome would dominate the Mediterranean world for centuries. Following this victory over Carthage, Rome expanded eastward into the Greek world. Many Greeks viewed the Romans simply as uncivilized barbarians. But they soon discovered that Roman armies had become extraordinarily effective, efficient. Within a relatively short period, Rome defeated the major Greek kingdoms. One Greek historian was so astonished by Rome's success that he devoted much of his life to understanding. Polybius, his name was. he devoted much of his life to simply understanding how the Romans had conquered so much territory so quickly. And his question remains relevant today. Why did Rome succeed when so many other empires failed? Part of the answer lies in military organization. Throughout much of antiquity, heavily armored infantry dominated battlefields. Infantry just refers to soldiers who fight on foot. The cavalry, these are soldiers who fight on horseback. The ancient Greeks developed something called a hoplite. This was a heavily armored soldier equipped with a spear, a shield, a helmet, and body armor. They fought together in dense, close formations. And these soldiers, they were almost unstoppable in frontal combat. Later, Alexander the Great improved this system. His soldiers carried enormous spears, some reaching over 4 meters in length. The result was an extraordinarily powerful formation. But Rome introduced something different: flexibility. Unlike earlier armies, Roman forces were divided into many smaller units. This meant commanders could adapt more easily during battle. The Roman legion was not simply one giant block of soldiers. It actually was a highly organized military machine. And this flexibility often proved decisive. During battles, Roman adaptability defeated older military systems based on Alexander's formations. Adaptability is just the ability to adjust successfully to new conditions. This idea extends way beyond military history. Successful businesses and societies and individuals also need adaptability, because the world changes. Those who cannot adapt often disappear. Rome survived because it constantly adapted. Another fascinating aspect of Roman military history concerns equipment and armor. The classic Roman legionary wore a helmet. He had a large curved shield, a short sword called the gladius, and body armor. And one famous type of Roman armor consisted of overlapping bands of metal that provided excellent protection, but it still allowed considerable movement. Ancient technology was often far more sophisticated than many people imagine. And historians, they continue to reconstruct ancient equipment in order to understand how these societies functioned in practice. Interestingly, many ancient forms of armor were surprisingly effective. Some Greek soldiers, including those in the armies of Alexander the Great, may have worn armor made largely from linen, glued together in multiple layers. And modern experiments suggest that this type of armor could provide impressive protection while remaining significantly lighter than bronze armor. This reminds us that ancient people were often highly innovative. They solved problems with the materials available to them, and sometimes produced results that still impress modern scientists and historians today. Now, no discussion of the ancient world would be complete without mentioning Alexander the Great. Alexander conquered an enormous empire before dying at only 32 years of age. Why was he so successful? Well, historians generally identify several reasons. First, he had extraordinary personal qualities. He was intelligent, charismatic, courageous, and he was supremely ambitious. But he also inherited a remarkable military system created mainly by his father, Philip II of Macedon. And finally, he understood how to combine different truth types in innovative ways. But Alexander, any studies of Alexander today, raises difficult moral questions. Can someone responsible for enormous destruction still be considered great? History rarely provides simple answers to these questions. And the final question: did Rome actually fall? Traditionally, historians date the fall of the Western Roman Empire, to the year 476 AD. But many argue that Rome never truly disappeared. Its language survives. I'll explain that in a second. Its laws survive. Its political ideas survive. Its architecture survives. Its influence remains everywhere. In fact, every time we use words such as republic or senate, or constitution or citizen, we are, in some sense, still speaking the language of Rome. Maybe the Roman Empire ended politically, but culturally, intellectually, Rome may still be with us. The story of Rome is not simply the story of conquest. It's the story of resilience, adaptation, integration, and ambition. And perhaps, above all, the story of human beings trying to build something that would outlast them, that would continue long after they disappeared. The Romans succeeded in this. More than 2,000 years later, we are still talking about them. And that may be the greatest victory of all. Thank you for listening to Listen Global English. If you've enjoyed today's episode, if you've learned a little bit about the Roman Empire, or perhaps you've improved your English a little bit, please remember to follow the podcast, leave a review, share it with anyone who loves history, politics, or just improving their English. Until next time, take care, keep learning, keep improving your English, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.